He sat alone at the charity gala's back table, watching couples dance while servers whispered cruel jokes about the lonely whale in Armani, until she approached with a gentle smile that would change everything. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the Metropolitan Hotel's ballroom, but none of those shadows fell darker than the one surrounding table 47. Edward Blackstone adjusted his custom-tailored tuxedo, $15,000 of Italian silk that couldn't quite disguise what lay beneath. At 350 pounds, he'd learned that money could buy the finest fabric, but it couldn't purchase a single genuine smile from the socialites who circled his wealth like vultures while avoiding his presence like poison. He watched the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala unfold before him with a detached observation of a man who'd bought his way into every exclusive event in the city, yet belonged to none of them. The mayor's wife giggled with her friends near the champagne fountain, occasionally glancing his way with poorly concealed disgust. The tech moguls he'd outbid on 3 major acquisitions this year clustered by the silent auction, their wives' plastic smiles faltering whenever his name was mentioned. Edward's thick fingers drummed against the white tablecloth as he calculated the evening's cost. $50,000 for the platinum sponsorship table, $25,000 for the silent auction painting he'd never hang, another $10,000 in additional donations to ensure his invitation next year. $85,000 to sit alone while waiters served him a dinner he barely tasted and conversations that never included him. More champagne, Mr. Blackstone? The young server approached with professional politeness, her eyes fixed somewhere over his left shoulder, a trick he'd noticed servers learned quickly. Never make eye contact with the fat man. It made everyone more comfortable. Thank you, Rebecca. He'd learned all their names over the years. It was one of the few powers his wealth still afforded him, the ability to matter to someone, even if only professionally. The server startled slightly that he knew her name, then softened. The salmon is particularly good tonight, sir. Chef Marcus outdid himself. Edward nodded, though he'd already pushed most of his plate around untouched. Food had lost much of its appeal years ago, once he'd realized it was both his comfort and his curse. I'm sure it is. Please give my compliments to the kitchen staff. As Rebecca departed, Edward caught fragments of conversation from the neighboring table. Can't believe they let people like that buy their way in. Heard he owns half the buildings downtown now. Money can't buy taste or a gym membership, apparently. The familiar sting of humiliation burned in his chest, but Edward had perfected the art of appearing unaffected. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails from his assistant about tomorrow's board meetings, merger negotiations, and charity requests, hundreds of charity requests from people who'd crossed the street to avoid him on the sidewalk. His empire stretched across 15 countries, renewable energy, real estate, technology startups that had made him billions. Forbes had named him one of the world's most influential entrepreneurs, 3 years running. He could buy and sell most people in this room twice over. Yet here he sat, as isolated as a teenage boy eating lunch alone in the high school cafeteria. The irony wasn't lost on him that he donated more to children's hospitals than anyone else in the room, yet their children would likely grow up learning to mock people who looked like him. Meanwhile, across the city in a cramped studio apartment above Rosa's diner, Amara Washington was fighting a different kind of battle. She sat cross-legged on her second-hand couch, surrounded by nursing textbooks and patient files, preparing for tomorrow's shift at Metropolitan General Hospital. The same hospital that was currently being celebrated by people who could afford to drop her yearly salary on a single dinner. Her scrubs hung freshly laundered on a hook by the door, royal blue cotton that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. In 6 hours, she'd put them on and spend another 12-hour shift in the pediatric wing, holding the hands of children whose parents couldn't afford the kind of medical care that billionaire donations made possible. Amara's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Keisha. Girl, you still studying? It's Saturday night. Come out with us. She smiled, typing back, some of us have to work Sunday morning. Besides, Mrs. Patterson's little boy is having surgery Monday. I want to review his case. The truth was more complex. At 32, Amara had learned to find fulfillment in purpose rather than parties. After her divorce 2 years ago, when David decided her dedication to her patients made her emotionally unavailable, she poured herself into her work with renewed intensity. Children didn't judge her for working double shifts or for the calluses on her hands from lifting patients. They didn't care that she drove a 15-year-old Honda or that her idea of a fancy dinner was take-out Chinese food eaten from the container. Her small apartment reflected a life of intentional simplicity, plants thriving on every windowsill, photographs of young patients who'd recovered under her care, and a bookshelf filled with medical journals and worn paperback novels. She'd learned contentment in small spaces and quiet moments. A knock at her door interrupted her studying. Mrs. Chun from downstairs stood in the hallway, holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. "Amara, dear, I made too much beef stew again. You're too skinny, always working, never eating properly." Amara accepted the plate with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Chun, you're an angel. I was about to eat cereal for dinner." "Cereal is not dinner. You take care of everyone else. Who takes care of you?" It was a question Amara had stopped asking herself. Self-reliance had become her armor, compassion for others her shield against loneliness. She'd convinced herself that fulfillment came through service, that romantic love was a luxury she couldn't afford and didn't need. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, she wondered what it would feel like to have someone see her, really see her, the way she saw her patient's potential for healing. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Neither Edward nor Amara knew that tomorrow's emergency would bring their worlds colliding in ways that would challenge everything they believed about love, worth, and the courage it takes to be seen. The emergency alarm pierced through Metropolitan General Hospital's usual Sunday morning calm at 7:43 a.m. Amara was halfway through her medication rounds in the pediatric wing when the announcement crackled over the intercom: Code Blue, Emergency Department. All available pediatric staff to ED immediately. She dropped her clipboard at the nurse's station and ran, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum. The elevator seemed to take forever, her mind racing through possibilities. Car accident, drowning, allergic reaction. In her 5 years in pediatric care, she'd learned that Sunday mornings could turn tragic without warning. The emergency department buzzed with controlled chaos. Paramedics wheeled in a stretcher carrying a small figure, a boy, maybe 8 years old, unconscious and barely breathing. Dr. Martinez was already barking orders as they transferred him to Trauma Bay 3. "What do we have?" Amara asked, falling into step beside the gurney. 8-year-old male, found unconscious in Washington Park Pond. Hypothermia, possible drowning. Core temp is dangerously low. We need warming protocols immediately. As they worked to stabilize the child, Amara noticed a commotion in the hallway. Through the glass partition, she saw him, a massive man in an expensive coat, soaked to the skin, arguing with security guards who were trying to prevent him from entering the trauma bay. "I pulled him out." The man's voice boomed through the chaos. "I need to know if he's okay." "Sir, you need to step back. Only family members." "I don't care about your protocols. That child was dying." Dr. Martinez looked up from the monitors. "Amara, find out what's happening out there. We need to focus." She pushed through the double doors and immediately recognized the man from newspaper photos, Edward Blackstone, the billionaire. But this wasn't the composed businessman from magazine covers. His usually perfectly styled hair was plastered to his scalp, his designer coat dripping pond water onto the hospital floor. His hands shook, not from cold, but from something deeper. "Mr. Blackstone?" Amara approached cautiously. "I'm Amara Washington, the boy's nurse. Can you tell me what happened?" Edward's eyes met hers, and she saw something that stopped her breath, raw, unguarded terror. Not the calculated concern of someone protecting his public image, but the authentic fear of a man who'd witnessed a child nearly die. "I was walking through the park," his voice came out rough, strained. "I walk there Sunday mornings. It's usually empty, nobody to." He stopped himself, then continued. "I heard splashing, saw him fall through the ice where kids had been playing yesterday. He went under." The security guard stepped forward. "Sir, we've told you, the doctors need space to work." "Let him speak," Amara said quietly, her eyes never leaving Edward's face. Something in his expression reminded her of the parents she'd comforted in these same hallways. That desperate need to know they'd done enough, been enough, mattered enough to save a life. Edward's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. I don't swim well. Never learned properly. But I went in anyway. The water was so cold, and he was so small, and I thought. His voice broke. I thought I might be too late. Too slow. Too. He gestured at himself with something close to disgust. But you weren't, Amara said softly. You saved him. Did I? The vulnerability in his question was startling. I carried him to shore, called 911, tried to remember CPR from some corporate training years ago. But my hands are so big, and he was so fragile, and I was afraid I'd hurt him more than help him. Through the glass, Amara could see the medical team working over the small form. The monitors were showing steady improvement, heart rate stabilizing, temperature slowly rising. The boy would live. What's your name? She asked. Edward looked surprised by the question. You don't know. I know who you are. I'm asking what your name is. The distinction seemed to affect him deeply. Edward. Eddie when I was young. Before. He gestured vaguely at himself again. Eddie, she repeated, and something shifted in his expression. Eddie, that little boy is going to be okay because you were brave enough to jump into freezing water to save a stranger. Do you understand that? A tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. I just couldn't let him drown. I couldn't walk away. Amara felt something crack open in her chest, a recognition she hadn't expected. She'd spent years caring for children, but she'd never seen someone risk everything for a child who wasn't theirs, asking nothing in return except the knowledge that they'd done the right thing. The boy's parents, she asked. Don't know. He was alone. Kids play there all the time. I've seen them on my walks. I always worry someone's going to fall through the ice. Edward wiped his face with his sleeve. I should have said something to the park services, put up better warning signs. If I'd acted sooner. Stop, Amara said firmly. You can't save everyone from every possible danger. But today, you saved one. That matters. Dr. Martinez emerged from the trauma bay, pulling off his gloves. The boy's stable. He's going to make a full recovery. Whoever pulled him out did everything right. A fast response probably prevented brain damage. Edward's knees nearly buckled with relief. Amara found herself reaching out instinctively, her hand touching his arm to steady him. Through the wet fabric, she felt him trembling. Can I see him? Edward asked. Just to know he's really okay? Dr. Martinez started to shake his head, but Amara spoke up. He's the one who saved him, doctor. 5 minutes. Something passed between the medical professionals, an understanding that healing sometimes required more than medicine. 5 minutes. But he's sedated, he won't be awake. Amara led Edward into the trauma bay. The child looked impossibly small against the white sheets, but his color was returning, his breathing steady and strong. Monitors beeped reassuringly in the background. Edward approached the bed slowly, as if afraid his presence might somehow cause harm. He's so young, he whispered. 8 years old. His name is Marcus, Amara said, reading from the chart that had just been updated with information from the police who'd identified him. Marcus, Edward repeated softly. He reached out tentatively, then pulled his hand back. May I? Amara nodded. Edward gently touched the boy's small hand with one finger, the briefest, most careful contact. I'm glad you're okay, Marcus, he whispered. In that moment, watching this powerful man show such tender concern for a child he'd never met, Amara felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a stirring of attraction that had nothing to do with appearance or status, and everything to do with character. Edward turned to leave, but stopped. Could you let me know how he recovers? I don't need details, I'd like to know he's okay. Of course, Amara heard herself saying. I could call you, if you'd like. Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. In the fluorescent lights of the trauma bay, with pond water still dripping from his hair and hospital antiseptic sharp in the air, Edward Blackstone had never looked more handsome to her. "I'd like that very much," he said quietly. As he walked away, Amara realized she was holding her breath. She'd seen heroes before, doctors, firefighters, police officers. But she'd never seen someone risk everything simply because it was right, expecting nothing but hoping desperately that it was enough. For the first time in 2 years, she wondered what it might be like to know someone that brave, that good, that real. The call came Tuesday evening at 6:47 p.m. Amara had just finished her shift and was walking to her car when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Telemarketers had been relentless lately, but something made her pick up. "Hello. Miss Washington? This is Edward. Edward Blackstone. You said I could call about Marcus." His voice sounded different over the phone, uncertain, almost shy. Nothing like the commanding presence she'd witnessed in the hospital. "Of course. Marcus is doing wonderfully. He woke up yesterday asking for chocolate pudding, which the doctors took as a very good sign." She found herself smiling as she unlocked her Honda. "He doesn't remember much about the accident, which is probably for the best." That's wonderful. Thank you for letting me know." There was a pause that stretched too long, and Amara sensed he wanted to say more but didn't know how. "His parents came in this morning," she continued. "They asked if they could thank you personally. I have your number now, if you'd like me to pass it along." "No." The response came too quickly, too sharp. "I mean, that's not necessary. I'm glad he's well. That's enough." Another pause. Amara climbed into her car but didn't start the engine. "Mr. Blackstone. Eddie, are you okay?" "I'm fine. I wanted to make sure the boy was recovering. Thank you for calling. I won't trouble you again." "It's no trouble." The line went dead. Amara stared at her phone, replaying the conversation. There had been something in his voice, a loneliness so profound it made her chest ache. She'd heard it before in the voices of parents sitting vigil over sick children, that hollow sound of someone trying to be strong while falling apart inside. Before she could second-guess herself, she was dialing him back. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, this is Amara. I was wondering if you'd like to meet for coffee sometime. To talk about Marcus, or whatever. I get off work at 7 most days. No pressure. Just call me back if you'd like." She hung up and immediately regretted it. What was she thinking? Edward Blackstone was a billionaire. He probably had assistants to screen his calls, lawyers to handle his social obligations. She was a pediatric nurse who drove a 15-year-old Honda and considered Olive Garden a splurge restaurant. But more than that, what did she really know about him? One heroic act didn't erase everything else. She'd read the business articles, the speculation about his ruthless negotiating tactics, his ability to destroy competitors without blinking. Maybe his rescue of Marcus was just another calculated move, another way to buy good publicity. The thought made her feel foolish and naive. Across town, Edward sat in his penthouse office, staring at his phone. Her voicemail had played 3 times before he'd forced himself to stop hitting replay. Her voice was warm, genuine, everything his world wasn't. But that was exactly why he couldn't call back. Coffee. She'd suggested coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like a woman who spent her days healing children would want to sit across from a man who'd spent his life crushing anyone who got in his way. "Mr. Blackstone?" His assistant, Patricia, knocked on the door. "Your 7 o'clock is here. The Henderson merger papers need your signature." "Cancel it." Edward didn't look up from his phone. "Sir? This merger has been in negotiation for 6 months. I said cancel it. Reschedule for tomorrow." Patricia hesitated. In 15 years of working for Edward, she'd never known him to postpone a business meeting. "Is everything all right?" Edward finally looked up, and Patricia was startled by what she saw in his face, a vulnerability she'd never witnessed before. "Patricia, do you have children?" The question caught her off guard. "2 daughters, sir. 16 and 18. Are they good kids?" "Very good kids, sir. though teenage girls can be. She stopped, unsure where this conversation was headed. What would you think if they wanted to have coffee with someone like me? Patricia studied her boss's face carefully. Edward Blackstone was many things: demanding, brilliant, sometimes ruthless in business, but she'd worked with him long enough to know he was also fair, generous with his staff, and utterly alone. Sir, if my daughters met someone who jumped into a freezing pond to save a drowning child, I'd want them to thank that person properly. No matter what that person looked like or how much money they had. Edward's eyes widened. How did you? The news picked up the story yesterday. Local businessman saves drowning boy. They didn't use your name, but I recognized the description. Patricia stepped closer. That was a brave thing you did. It wasn't brave. Anyone would have. No, sir. Not anyone. Most people would have called 911 and hoped someone else would handle it. She paused. This nurse who called, she sounds like a good person. That's exactly the problem. Edward turned back to the window overlooking the city. Good people don't belong in my world, Patricia. They get hurt here. Used. Corrupted. Or maybe they make the world a little better. Edward was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, delete her number from my phone. Block it if necessary. Sir. That's an order, Patricia. She looked at him sadly but nodded. Yes, sir. 3 days later, Amara was working a double shift when Dr. Martinez found her in the break room during her dinner break. Interesting visitor today, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Oh. Edward Blackstone stopped by. Left an envelope for Marcus, college fund, full scholarship. Enough to pay for Harvard Medical School if the kid wants it. Amara nearly choked on her sandwich. He was here? When? About an hour ago. Asked specifically that no one contact him about it. Very clear that he wanted no recognition, no thank you notes, nothing. Dr. Martinez studied her face. You knew him. We met when Marcus was brought in. I gave him my number to call about the boy's recovery. She tried to keep her voice casual. Did he ask about me? Actually, yes. Asked if you were working today. When I said you were here, he said good, and left immediately. Good. Amara felt a mix of hurt and confusion. What did he mean, good? I think he meant he was glad you were safely at work and not somewhere he might accidentally run into you. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He was avoiding her. After that moment in the trauma bay, after the phone call, after her voicemail invitation, he was actively avoiding her. Why would he do that? She asked quietly. Dr. Martinez leaned back in his chair. You know, I've been practicing medicine for 20 years. I've met a lot of wealthy donors, board members, and politicians. Most of them want their names on buildings, their photos in newsletters. This guy sets up a college fund for a kid he doesn't know, insists on complete anonymity, and runs away when he hears the one person who showed him kindness is nearby. He shrugged. That tells me he either thinks he's not good enough for you, or he thinks he's protecting you from something. Have you ever walked away from someone because you thought you were protecting them? Sometimes we hurt people by trying to shield them from ourselves. What do you think? Was Edward right to stay away? Share your thoughts below. Amara stared at the remains of her sandwich, no longer hungry. She thought about the man who'd trembled in the hospital hallway, who'd whispered so gently to an unconscious child, who'd called just to know a little boy was okay. Then she thought about the same man who'd just donated what was probably more money than she'd make in her lifetime to a child's future, while deliberately avoiding any chance of seeing her again. For the first time since her divorce, Amara found herself caring about a man who seemed determined to disappear from her life. The worst part was, she was beginning to understand why. The Metropolitan Children's Hospital Foundation's emergency board meeting was called for Thursday at 2 p.m., an unusual time that caught everyone off guard. Amara had never been invited to a board meeting before, but Dr. Martinez insisted her presence was essential. The Blackstone donation has created some complications, he explained as they walked toward the conference room. The legal department needs to verify the rescue story, and since you were the primary medical contact, they need your statement. Amara's stomach knotted. What kind of complications? Apparently, some board members are questioning whether a single heroic act should result in such a massive anonymous donation. They want to ensure it's legitimate and not some kind of tax shelter scheme. Dr. Martinez lowered his voice. Between you and me, I think they're more concerned about the optics of accepting money from someone they consider unsuitable for their social circles. The conference room buzzed with tension when they arrived. 12 board members sat around an imposing mahogany table, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile. At the head of the table sat Margaret Whitfield, the foundation's chairman and wife of a prominent judge. "Ah, Dr. Martinez, Miss Washington, please sit." Mrs. Whitfield's smile was as warm as the Arctic wind. "We're discussing the substantial anonymous donation made this week. $750,000 is not a sum we can accept without proper vetting." Amara took her seat, trying to process the amount. $750,000. For one little boy's future. The donor claims to have rescued a drowning child, continued board member Harrison Reeves, a pharmaceutical executive. But we have only the word of hospital staff. No witnesses, no media coverage at the time. It seems convenient. Convenient. Dr. Martinez's voice sharpened. "A child nearly died." Of course. But you must understand our position. This hospital's reputation." The conference room door opened, and Edward Blackstone stepped inside. Amara's breath caught. He looked different, more formal, more guarded. His expensive suit was perfectly tailored, his expression carefully neutral. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched slightly at his sides. "Mr. Blackstone," Mrs. Whitfield's voice could have frozen champagne. "We weren't expecting you. I received your message requesting documentation of Sunday's incident." Edward's voice was steady, businesslike. "I came to provide it personally." He moved to the far end of the table, as distant from Amara as possible, though she noticed his eyes flicker toward her once before he focused on the board. "The documentation, Mr. Blackstone?" Harrison Reeves extended his hand. Edward placed a folder on the table. Police report, paramedic statements, witness account from a jogger who saw the rescue from across the park. Also included are the hospital's admission records and the attending physician's notes confirming hypothermia and near drowning. Mrs. Whitfield opened the folder, scanning the contents. Her expression shifted slightly, surprise, then what might have been disappointment. "This appears to be thorough," she admitted grudgingly. "I'm a businessman, Mrs. Whitfield. I document everything." Edward's tone was clipped, professional. "The donation stands as written. Anonymous, no recognition required, funds to be held in trust for Marcus Thompson's education." Board member Sandra Mills, a socialite who'd never worked a day in her life, leaned forward. "Mr. Blackstone, surely you understand our concerns. Such a large donation raises questions about motives." "My motives are irrelevant." Edward's voice cut through the room like a blade. "A child's life has value. His future has value. The amount reflects that belief." "But why so much?" pressed another member. "A college fund could be established for far less." "Because," Edward said quietly, and for the first time, Amara heard emotion seep into his voice, "I know what it's like to be written off before you've had a chance to prove your worth. Marcus will have every opportunity, every door opened, every chance to become whoever he wants to be. No one will ever be able to say he didn't have enough resources to succeed." The room fell silent. Amara felt tears prick her eyes as she understood. This wasn't just about Marcus. This was about every time Edward had been dismissed, overlooked, judged by his appearance rather than his character. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat. "The rescue is verified. The donation is legitimate. I move that we accept it with gratitude and proceed with establishing the educational trust." "Seconded," said Dr. Patricia Wong, the only other medical professional on the board. Mrs. Whitfield looked around the table, clearly unhappy but unable to find legal grounds for objection. "All in favor?" 7 hands rose, including Amara's, though she wasn't sure she had voting rights. Motion carries. Mrs. Whitfield's tone suggested she'd bitten into something sour. Mr. Blackstone, the Foundation accepts your generous donation. Edward nodded curtly. If there's nothing else, I have other commitments. He turned to leave, but Dr. Martinez spoke up. Actually, there is one more item on the agenda. The hospital's annual charity auction next month. Given your generosity, we hoped you might consider participating as a sponsor or donor. Edward paused at the door. Send the information to my office. My assistant will handle it. Actually, Mrs. Whitfield said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, we hoped you might attend personally. Many of our major donors will be there. It would be an excellent networking opportunity. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Amara watched Edward's face, saw the moment he understood what was really being asked, that he made himself available for the social judgment of people who'd already made up their minds about him. I'll consider it, he said finally. As he reached for the door handle, Amara found herself standing. Mr. Blackstone? He froze, his hand on the door, but didn't turn around. Thank you, she said simply. For Marcus. For everything. His shoulders tensed, and she saw his reflection in the glass door panel, a flash of pain so raw it took her breath away. It wasn't enough, he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. It's never enough. Then he was gone, leaving Amara standing in a room full of people who had no idea they'd just witnessed a man's heartbreaking. After the meeting dispersed, Dr. Martinez found her in the hallway, staring at the elevator Edward had taken. He's going to attend the auction, he said. How do you know? Because he's hoping you'll be there. And he's terrified you will be. Amara looked at him questioningly. The man just donated $750,000 to a child he doesn't know, then sat through 40 minutes of barely concealed insults from people who see his money as acceptable but his presence as offensive. He could have sent his lawyer, his assistant, anyone. But he came himself. Dr. Martinez paused. The only reason he'd put himself through that is if he hoped to see you, even if he's too scared to actually talk to you. He avoided looking at me the entire time. Exactly. If you didn't matter to him, he would have looked. The fact that he couldn't tell you everything you need to know. As Amara drove home that evening, she couldn't stop thinking about Edward's reflection in that glass door, the pain, the loneliness, the desperate hope he was trying so hard to hide. For the first time, she understood that she wasn't the only one who was scared. The charity auction was still 2 weeks away when Amara found herself standing outside Blackstone Industries' downtown headquarters on a rainy Saturday afternoon. She'd told herself she was just running errands nearby, but the truth was more complicated. She needed to understand the man who'd walked away from her twice now, once on the phone, once in that conference room. The lobby was all marble and steel, intimidating in its perfection. The security guard looked at her rain-soaked scrubs with barely concealed disdain. I'm here to see Mr. Blackstone, she said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. Do you have an appointment? No, but Mr. Blackstone doesn't take walk-ins. You can contact his office Monday morning to schedule. Is there a problem here? A woman's voice interrupted. Amara turned to see an elegantly dressed woman in her 50s approaching, silver hair perfectly styled, kind eyes behind designer glasses. This person wants to see Mr. Blackstone without an appointment, Ms. Caldwell, the guard explained. I'm Patricia Caldwell, Mr. Blackstone's assistant. She studied Amara's face. You're the nurse. From the hospital. It wasn't a question. Amara nodded. Patricia looked at her watch. He's upstairs. Alone, as usual on weekends. Working. She paused, seeming to make a decision. 42nd floor. Corner office. Tell him I sent you up. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, Amara stepped into a reception area that screamed wealth and power, but it was empty, silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Through glass doors, she could see a large office where Edward sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers. She knocked softly. He looked up, and she watched shock, hope, and fear chase each other across his face. Amara. Her name sounded like a prayer on his lips. How did you, Patricia? She thought you could use the company. Edward stood slowly, as if moving through water. You shouldn't be here. Why not? Because. He gestured helplessly at the opulent office, then at himself. Because this isn't your world. Because you have no idea who I really am. Then tell me. She stepped closer. Tell me who you really are, Eddie. The use of his childhood nickname broke something inside him. She saw his carefully constructed walls crumble, and suddenly he wasn't the intimidating billionaire anymore. He was just a lonely man who'd forgotten how to let someone care about him. You want to know who I am? His voice was raw. I'm the fat kid who ate lunch alone every day from kindergarten through high school. I'm the teenager whose own father told him he'd never amount to anything because nobody respects a fat man in business. I'm the college student who made his first million by being smarter and more ruthless than anyone expected, because I learned early that if people are going to hate you anyway, you might as well give them a reason. Amara felt her heart breaking with each word, but she didn't speak. She could see he needed to say this, maybe for the first time in his life. I've destroyed companies, Amara. I've ruined careers of people who got in my way. I've used my wealth like a weapon because it was the only power I had. He turned to face the window, unable to look at her. 3 years ago, I bought out a small family business just because the owner's son made a joke about my weight at a charity dinner. 37 people lost their jobs because I couldn't let an insult slide. The silence stretched between them. Outside, rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows. Are you finished? Amara asked quietly. Edward's shoulders tensed. Finished what? Trying to convince me you're a monster. He turned around slowly. Didn't you hear what I just? I heard you tell me about choices you've made. Bad choices, maybe. But I also know what I saw in that hospital. She stepped closer. I saw a man jump into freezing water to save a stranger's child. I saw someone so gentle with an unconscious little boy that it made me cry. I saw a person donate $750,000 and insist on no recognition because it wasn't about him, it was about giving a child every chance to succeed. One good act doesn't erase. No, it doesn't. But it reveals character. The real question is, which version of yourself do you want to be going forward? Edward sank into his desk chair, suddenly looking exhausted. It doesn't matter what I want to be. Do you know what people call me behind my back? The whale. Blackstone the beast. I've heard the whispers my entire life, Amara. I've seen the disgust in people's faces, the way they avoid sitting next to me at restaurants, the way women look through me like I don't exist. I'm looking right at you, she said softly. Why? The word came out broken. Why would someone like you want anything to do with someone like me? Amara moved around the desk until she was standing beside his chair. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and touched his face, turning him to look at her. Because when Marcus was lying in that hospital bed, barely breathing, you touched his hand like he was made of spun glass. Because you called to check on a child you'd never see again. Because you set up a college fund that will change a little boy's entire life. Her thumb brushed away a tear he didn't know had fallen. Because I've spent 5 years taking care of children, and I've never seen anyone show such pure, selfless love for a child they didn't even know. Amara. I'm not finished. Her voice was firm but gentle. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who's spent so many years being hurt that he forgot he's worthy of love. I see a man who's convinced himself he's a monster because it's easier than risking his heart again. Edward closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. You don't understand. I've been alone for so long. I don't know how to be anything else. Maybe you don't have to be alone anymore. The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and terror in equal measure. I could hurt you, he whispered. Not physically, but I could disappoint you. Let you down. I've never been in a real relationship, Amara. I don't know how to be what someone else needs. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be real. She smiled sadly. Besides, I'm not exactly an expert at relationships either. My ex-husband left because he said I cared more about my patients than I did about him. Maybe he was right. Edward opened his eyes, studying her face. He was an idiot. Maybe. But the point is, we're both a little broken. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we can figure it out together. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Edward reached up and covered her hand with his, holding it against his cheek. I'm scared, he admitted. Me too. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt you either. So what do we do? Amara smiled, and it was the first genuinely hopeful expression Edward had seen in years. We start small. Coffee. Like I suggested before. Edward's lips quirked upward in what might have been the beginning of a smile. I know a place. As they stood together in his office, rain pattering against the windows, neither of them knew that Patricia was smiling to herself 40 floors below, already planning to clear Edward's schedule for the rest of the weekend. Some risks, she knew, were worth taking. The coffee shop Edward chose wasn't what Amara expected. Instead of some upscale downtown establishment, he drove them to a small family-owned cafe called Rosie's Corner, in a quiet neighborhood she'd never visited. The kind of place with mismatched chairs, handwritten specials on a chalkboard, and the smell of fresh-baked muffins filling the air. This is your secret coffee spot, she asked as they settled into a corner booth, away from a handful of other Saturday afternoon customers. Edward looked almost embarrassed. I know it's not much. But Rosie, the owner, she's never treated me differently. Never stared or whispered. I've been coming here for 8 years, and she just sees me as a customer who tips well and likes his coffee black. As if summoned by his words, a woman in her 60s approached their table with a genuine smile. Eddie. Yours. She glanced at Amara with curiosity, but no judgment. And what can I get for your friend? Rosie, this is Amara. Amara, Rosie makes the best apple cinnamon muffins in the city. Apple cinnamon muffin it is, then, Amara said. And a vanilla latte, please. After Rosie left, a comfortable silence settled between them. Amara watched Edward relax incrementally, his shoulders dropping, his breathing deepening. Here, in this simple place, he looked younger somehow. Tell me about the walks in the park, she said. Sunday mornings, you said? Edward stirred his coffee, a small smile playing at his lips. Started about 5 years ago. My doctor said I needed exercise, but gyms. He shrugged. Too many mirrors, too many people pretending not to stare. So I found Washington Park. Early Sunday mornings, it's mostly empty. Just joggers who are too focused on their own goals to pay attention to me. And that's how you knew kids played by the pond. Yeah. During warmer months, I'd see families there. Kids feeding ducks, parents pushing strollers. His expression grew wistful. I always wondered what that felt like, being part of something like that. What do you mean? Edward was quiet for a moment, then said, I don't have any family, Amara. My parents died in a car accident when I was 25. No siblings. No cousins I'm close to. My father's will was explicit about his disappointment in me. Left everything to charity rather than his embarrassment of a son. Amara's chest tightened. Eddie, I'm so sorry. It motivated me, actually. I used that anger, that need to prove him wrong. Built an empire just to show a dead man that the fat kid he was ashamed of could matter. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turns out success doesn't fill the empty spaces very well. Rosie returned with their order, and Amara was grateful for the interruption. She watched Edward take a bite of his muffin, saw the genuine pleasure that crossed his face. These really are incredible, she said after tasting hers. Rosie's secret ingredient, Edward said conspiratorially, is that she actually cares about what she's making. Novel concept in my world. What is your world like, really? Beyond the business articles and Forbes lists. Edward considered the question seriously. Lonely. Successful but lonely. I work 16-hour days because there's nothing else to go home to. I attend charity galas because it's expected, not because I enjoy them. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I eat dinner alone most nights watching Netflix like everyone else. What do you watch? The question seemed to surprise him. Cooking shows, mostly. I like watching people create something beautiful, something that brings joy to others. It's peaceful. I love cooking shows too, Amara said. There's something soothing about them. Although I'm terrible in the kitchen myself. Really? I assumed, being a nurse, you'd be good at taking care of yourself. I can keep someone alive in a medical emergency, but ask me to cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs and we're all in trouble. She laughed. Mrs. Chun, my neighbor, has basically adopted me. She brings me food twice a week because she's convinced I'll waste away otherwise. Mrs. Chun sounds wonderful. She is. She lost her husband last year, and her children live across the country. I think taking care of me helps her feel needed. Amara paused. We all need to feel needed, don't we? Edward's eyes met hers. Do you? Feel needed. At work, absolutely. My kids, my patients, they depend on me. But personally, she shrugged. After my divorce, I convinced myself I was better off independent. Self-sufficient. But sometimes, when I come home to my empty apartment after a difficult day, I wonder what it would be like to have someone to talk to. Someone who cares how my day went. What happened with your marriage? Amara stirred her latte, gathering her thoughts. David was a good man. Is a good man. But he wanted a wife who would make him the center of her universe, and I couldn't turn off my need to help others. When I'd stay late to comfort a scared child, or work double shifts because we were understaffed, he saw it as choosing my patients over him. Were you? Maybe sometimes. But I don't know how to love halfway. When I care about someone, whether it's a patient or a partner, I give everything I have. She looked up at him. David said that was my flaw, that I didn't know how to hold anything back. That's not a flaw, Edward said quietly. That's a gift. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Amara felt something shift between them, a deeper recognition, an understanding that they were both people who loved completely, who just never found someone who could love them the same way in return. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. At the hospital, in Marcus's room, when you touched his hand, have you ever wanted children of your own? Edward's expression grew soft and sad. I used to. When I was younger, before I understood how the world sees me. I'd imagine teaching a son to throw a baseball, walking a daughter down the aisle at her wedding. He shook his head. But what child deserves to be embarrassed by their father? What woman would want to have children with someone like me? Someone who sees what I see when I look at you. And what's that? A man who would love his family so fiercely, so completely, that they'd never doubt for a second how much they mattered to him. Her voice grew thick with emotion. A man who would jump into freezing water to save any child, not just his own. A man who would set up college funds and ask for nothing in return because he understands that love means wanting someone to have every opportunity to succeed. Edward's hands trembled slightly as he reached across the table, covering hers with his. How do you see all that in me when I can barely see it in myself? Because I know what real love looks like. I see it every day in my work, parents who would do anything for their children. And I see it in you, Eddie. Maybe you've never had anyone to love that way, but the capacity is there. It's huge and beautiful, and it's been waiting for the right person to share it with. A tear slipped down Edward's cheek. I don't know if I know how to do this. To be with someone. To trust that they won't leave when they see who I really am. I'm looking at who you really are right now. And I'm not going anywhere. Promise. The word came out vulnerable, childlike, and Amara's heart broke and soared at the same time. I promise. As they sat in Rosie's Corner Cafe, hands linked across a worn wooden table, both of them felt something they'd almost given up on, the possibility that they might not have to face the world alone anymore. Outside, the rain had stopped, and afternoon sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds. The charity auction was exactly the kind of event Amara had always avoided. Crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, and the subtle hierarchy of wealth displayed through jewelry and handbags worth more than most people's cars. She stood at the entrance of the Grand Metropolitan Ballroom in her one good black dress, feeling completely out of place. She was there because Edward had asked her to come. Not directly, he'd been too nervous for that, but Patricia had called 3 days earlier. He bought a table, Patricia had said. Table for 10, just for himself. He's terrified you won't show up, and equally terrified you will. Now, scanning the crowd of perfectly coiffed socialites and business moguls, Amara understood why. This wasn't just a charity auction, it was Edward's world, with all its sharp edges and cruel judgments. She found him sitting alone at table 12, toward the back of the room. He'd positioned himself where he could see the exits, she noticed. Always planning an escape route. "You came," he said when he spotted her, standing so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. "I promised I would." She accepted his offered arm, feeling the tremor in his muscles. "You look handsome." He did. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his hair styled, his cologne subtle and expensive. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around the room cataloging every whisper, every sideways glance. "I shouldn't have asked you to come," he said as he helped her into her chair. "This was selfish of me." "Eddie, it's okay." "No, it's not." His voice was tight. "Look around, Amara. Look at how they're all staring." She did look, and he was right. Their table had become the center of subtle but unmistakable attention. Women leaned toward each other behind raised programs. Men pointed with their champagne glasses. The whispers followed predictable patterns. "That's Edward Blackstone. With a woman. Who is she?" "She's actually quite pretty. What do you think she wants from him?" "Let them stare," Amara said firmly, taking his hand. "We're here for the children's hospital. That's what matters." Edward squeezed her fingers gratefully, but she could feel him pulling away emotionally, retreating behind the protective walls she'd worked so hard to breach. The evening progressed with painful predictability. During dinner, several board members stopped by their table with polite greetings that felt like social obligations. Margaret Whitfield, the foundation chairman, was particularly pointed in her attention to Amara. "Miss Washington, isn't it? How lovely that you could attend. Though I imagine this is quite different from your usual social scene." "The Children's Hospital is always worth supporting," Amara replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. "Of course. Though I do hope you understand the complexity of Mr. Blackstone's position in our community. Wealth brings responsibilities, and associations can be so important." Edward's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Margaret had moved on with a saccharine smile. "I should go," Amara whispered. "No." Edward's grip on her hand tightened. "Please don't let them chase you away." But the damage was building with each interaction. Harrison Reeves accidentally bumped into their table, spilling wine on the tablecloth while apologizing with obvious insincerity. Sandra Mills made a point of loudly discussing the appropriate companions for hospital board members within obvious earshot. The breaking point came during the live auction. Amara had been amazed by the amounts being bid: $50,000 for a weekend in the Hamptons, $75,000 for a yacht charter. When a week-long European vacation package came up, Edward raised his paddle. $100,000, he called out clearly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer smiled. "We have $100,000. Do I hear $110,000? Silence. Going once at $100,000. $110,000. The voice came from across the room. Sandra Mills, her smile poisonous. Edward raised his paddle again. $150,000. $160,000, Sandra countered immediately. Amara felt the room's energy shift. This wasn't about charity anymore. It was a public display of wealth and power, with Edward as the target. $200,000, Edward said firmly. $210,000, Sandra shot back without hesitation. "Eddie, don't," Amara whispered, seeing where this was heading. But Edward was caught now in the same cycle that had driven him his entire life, the need to prove he belonged, to show that he couldn't be dismissed or humiliated. $300,000. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. The vacation package was worth maybe $25,000. Everyone knew what was happening. Sandra Mills smiled triumphantly. $310,000. Edward started to raise his paddle again, but Amara caught his wrist. "Stop," she said urgently. "Please. This isn't about charity anymore." He looked at her, and she saw the moment he realized what he'd been doing, performing like a trained animal for people who would never accept him no matter how much money he threw around. $310,000 going once, twice, sold to Mrs. Mills. Applause filled the room, but it felt mocking. Amara watched Edward shrink into himself, his face flushing with humiliation. After the auction ended, they found themselves cornered near the bar by Harrison Reeves and 2 other board members. "Quite a spirited bidding war there, Blackstone," Harrison said with false joviality. "Though I have to say, $300,000 seems a bit excessive for someone in your position." "My position?" Edward's voice was dangerously quiet. "Well, we all know your generous donations come with certain expectations. But surely you don't need to be so obvious about buying your way into social acceptance." The words hit like physical blows. Amara saw Edward's face go pale, then red. "At least I earn my money honestly," Edward said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet space around them. "Instead of inheriting it from Daddy and pretending I'm self-made." Harrison's face darkened. "How dare you?" "How dare I what? Tell the truth? Your pharmaceutical company has been overcharging the hospital for basic supplies for years. My donations could actually help children if they weren't being filtered through your profit margins." "Edward," Amara touched his arm, trying to calm him, but he was beyond reasoning now. "You want to know why I donate anonymously?" Edward continued, his voice rising. "Because I know exactly what you think of me. You'll take my money, but you'll never see me as anything more than a freak show you have to tolerate." "Eddie, please," Amara tried again. "No." He turned on her with eyes blazing with hurt and fury. "You don't understand, Amara. You can't understand. You're beautiful, accomplished, respected. You have no idea what it's like to be looked at the way they look at me. That's not fair. Isn't it? Look around. Every person in this room is wondering what you're doing with me. What I'm paying you, what I'm promising you, what kind of sick arrangement we must have because clearly a woman like you wouldn't choose to be with a man like me." The words hung in the air like poison. Around them, conversations had stopped entirely. Everyone was listening now, watching the public meltdown of Edward Blackstone. Amara felt tears sting her eyes. "You don't mean that." "Don't I? Maybe they're right. Maybe this was all a fantasy. Maybe you're just here because you feel sorry for me. Stop it. Or maybe you like the idea of reforming the monster. The beautiful nurse who saved the beast. What a story that would make." "Edward, stop." Her voice broke on his name. "Go home, Amara. Go back to your real life, with real people who don't embarrass you in public." She stared at him for a long moment, seeing the pain and self-hatred that had driven him to lash out at the one person who'd shown him unconditional acceptance. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't understand what it's like to be you. But I thought I understood who you were underneath all this anger and hurt. I thought I saw someone worth loving." She turned to leave, then stopped. "But I was wrong about something too. The person I fell for, the one who saved Marcus, who touched that little boy's hand so gently, who set up a college fund because he believed in a child's potential, that person would never use his pain as a weapon to hurt someone who cares about him." Edward watched her walk away, every step taking her further from the first real love he'd ever known. Around him, the whispers started again, but for once, he didn't care what they were saying about his appearance. All he cared about was that he'd just destroyed the only good thing that had ever happened to him. Have you ever sabotaged something good in your life because you were afraid of losing it? Sometimes we hurt the people we love most when we're scared. Do you think Edward can find his way back to the man Amara fell in love with? Share your thoughts. We all need redemption sometimes. Harrison Reeves clapped him on the shoulder with mock sympathy. Better off without her anyway, Blackstone. She was clearly out of your league. For the first time in his life, Edward Blackstone didn't care what anyone else thought of him. The only opinion that had ever mattered was walking out the door, and he had no one to blame but himself. Edward sat in his penthouse office at 3 a.m., staring at the city lights blurred through windows streaked with rain. 3 days had passed since the charity auction. 3 days since he destroyed the best thing in his life with the precision of a man who'd spent decades perfecting self-sabotage. His desk was littered with the remnants of his attempts to return to normal, merger documents he couldn't focus on, quarterly reports that meant nothing, and 17 different drafts of an apology text he couldn't bring himself to send. The truth was simpler and more terrifying than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. He missed her. Not just her presence, but the version of himself he'd been becoming when she looked at him. For the first time in 43 years, someone had seen him as more than his bank account or his appearance, and he'd thrown it away because he was too broken to believe he deserved it. His phone buzzed. Patricia's name appeared on the screen. "It's 3 a.m., Patricia. Go home to your family." "I am home, sir. But I've been thinking about what happened at the auction." Edward closed his eyes. Even his assistant pitied him now. "Patricia, I don't need. My daughter Hannah called me tonight. She's 18, about to start college. She wanted to know if the story she'd read online was true, about a businessman who saved a drowning child and set up a college fund." Edward's stomach clenched. The press picked it up. A small piece in the Metro section. No photos, no names. But Hannah was so moved by it. She said she hoped someday she'd meet someone with that kind of heart. Patricia paused. "She has no idea I work for you." "Where are you going with this?" She described the man in the article as a hero. Someone who saw a child in danger and acted without thinking about himself. Someone who gave everything and asked for nothing. Another pause. "Is that who you are, Edward? Or is the man who lashed out at a woman who loved him the real you?" The question hit like a physical blow. Edward set the phone on speaker and buried his face in his hands. "I don't know anymore." "Yes, you do. You know exactly who you are. You're just scared to be that person because it means being vulnerable again." Edward was quiet for a long time. Finally, he asked, "How do I fix this?" "The same way you built an empire from nothing. One decision at a time. Starting with the most important one. Do you love her?" "Yes." The word came out broken but certain. Then stop thinking like Edward Blackstone the businessman, and start thinking like Eddie, the man who jumped into freezing water to save a child. After Patricia hung up, Edward sat in the silence of his empty office, surrounded by all the symbols of his success, awards, photographs with politicians, artifacts from deals that had made him billions. None of it meant anything without someone to share it with. He picked up his phone and scrolled to Amara's number. His thumb hovered over the call button for 20 minutes before he set it down again. This conversation couldn't happen over the phone. If he was going to bare his soul, he needed to do it properly. Amara had been dreading her shift at the hospital, knowing she might run into someone who'd heard about the auction. But she'd underestimated how quickly gossip traveled in their social circles. By noon, 3 different colleagues had asked if she was okay with expressions that suggested they'd heard some version of events. She was in the pediatric supply room, counting inventory to keep her hands busy, when Dr. Martinez found her. "Rough few days?" he asked gently. "You heard." Margaret Whitfield called the hospital administrator. Something about inappropriate relationships between staff and donors. She was descriptive about the auction incident. Amara's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I'm sorry if this creates problems for Amara." Dr. Martinez's voice was firm. "Margaret Whitfield is a sanctimonious woman who's never worked a day in her life and thinks her husband's judicial appointment makes her an authority on everyone else's character. Her opinion means less than nothing to me." "But Edward." Made a fool of himself, yes. Lashed out at you when he should have been grateful for your loyalty. But I've been thinking about something. He leaned against the supply cabinet. I've known Edward Blackstone professionally for 5 years. I've seen him at board meetings, charity events, hospital functions. Until that night, I'd never seen him lose control of himself. Not once. Your point. People don't have public breakdowns over situations that don't matter to them. He didn't destroy his reputation defending his right to attend social events. He destroyed it defending his right to love you. Amara shook her head. That's not what happened. He pushed me away. Because he was terrified. Because Margaret Whitfield and her cronies were doing exactly what he'd feared they'd do, questioning your motives, implying you were using him. And instead of trusting that you knew your own heart, he panicked. I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me. Can you be with someone who's learning to trust for the first time in his life? Before Amara could answer, her pager buzzed. Emergency in room 314. She ran toward the pediatric ward, grateful for the distraction, but Dr. Martinez's words followed her down the hallway. Room 314 was Marcus Thompson's room. The boy who'd started it all was back for a follow-up appointment, and he'd specifically asked to see the nice nurse who was there when I woke up. Miss Amara. Marcus's face lit up when she entered. He was sitting up in bed, coloring in a superhero coloring book, looking healthy and vibrant. Look what I made you. He held up a crayon drawing of a large figure pulling a small figure from blue scribbles that might have been water. In the corner, a heart was drawn in red crayon. It's the man who saved me, Marcus explained proudly. Mama says he was like a superhero, but he didn't have a cape. Amara's throat tightened. It's beautiful, Marcus. Mama also says he gave me money for college. Is that true? It's true. Marcus considered this seriously. I want to be a doctor when I grow up. Like Dr. Martinez. Will the money help with that? It will help with whatever you want to become. Good. Then I can save people too, just like he saved me. Marcus looked up at her with wide, earnest eyes. Do you think he's sad? What do you mean? In my drawing, he looks sad. Even though he's being a hero. Mama says sometimes people are sad even when they do good things. Amara stared at the drawing, seeing it through a child's uncomplicated perspective. The large figure did look sad. Marcus had drawn downturned eyes, drooping shoulders. But the red heart in the corner suggested something else. Love, pure and simple. Maybe he's not sad anymore, she told Marcus softly. I hope not. Heroes shouldn't be sad. As Amara left Marcus's room, she found herself thinking about heroes and choices. About the man who'd jumped into freezing water without thinking twice, and the same man who'd been so afraid of losing her that he'd pushed her away first. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Can we talk? I'll understand if the answer is no, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Eddie. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she thought about 8-year-old Marcus, who saw heroes and hearts even in crayon drawings, who believed that people who save others shouldn't have to be sad. Maybe everyone deserved a chance at redemption. Maybe love was worth the risk of being hurt again. Maybe the man who'd touched a child's hand so gently was still there, underneath all the fear and self-protection. She typed back, Rosie's Corner Cafe. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Don't be late. The response came immediately, thank you. I won't let you down again. As Amara drove home that evening, she carried Marcus's drawing with her, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is give someone a second chance to be the hero you know they can be. Edward arrived at Rosie's Corner Cafe 30 minutes early, his hands shaking as he ordered his usual black coffee. He'd barely slept in 4 days, had lost 12 pounds from stress, and looked like a man preparing for the most important meeting of his life, which, he realized, was exactly what this was. Rosie approached his table with her usual warm smile, but Edward could see concern in her eyes. You look terrible, Eddie. You eating enough? I'm fine, Rosie. Just nervous. About the pretty nurse who's coming to see you? Edward's head snapped up. How did you? Honey, I've been watching you sit alone in that booth for 8 years. Last week, you brought a woman here and I saw you smile, really smile, for the first time since I've known you. Now you're here looking like your world's ending, waiting for her to show up. Rosie patted his shoulder gently. Whatever happened, fix it. Life's too short to spend it alone when you don't have to. At exactly 2 p.m., Amara walked through the door. Edward's breath caught. She looked beautiful but guarded, her usual warmth replaced by careful neutrality. She slid into the booth across from him without a word. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I almost didn't." "I know. I wouldn't have, in your position." Rosie appeared with Amara's vanilla latte without being asked, squeezing her shoulder supportively before retreating to give them privacy. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid settling between them. "I brought you something," Edward said finally, pulling out a manila envelope. "It's not an apology, words can't fix what I did. But maybe this will help you understand." Amara opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph, a school picture of a young boy, maybe 10 years old, with Edward's eyes but a fuller face, wearing a forced smile that didn't reach his expression. "That's me in 5th grade, Edward said softly. 3 weeks before this photo was taken, my father came to a school talent show. I'd been practicing piano for months, finally worked up the courage to perform. I was so excited for him to see me do something well." Amara studied the photograph, seeing the hope and vulnerability in the child's face. "I made it through the first 2 minutes perfectly. Then I hit a wrong note and panicked. Started over. Hit another wrong note. The other kids began laughing." Edward's voice grew thick. "I looked at my father in the audience, and he was looking at his watch. Embarrassed. Disgusted. When I got home, he told me I'd humiliated him in front of his business associates. Said I should stick to things fat kids were good at, like eating and staying invisible." Tears pricked Amara's eyes as she looked at the boy in the photograph, seeing the exact moment hope had started to die. "I kept that picture to remind myself never to take risks that might end in public humiliation," Edward continued. "For 33 years, it worked. I built walls so high that nothing could hurt me. Until me," Amara said softly. "Until you." He met her eyes. "You made me feel like that 10-year-old boy again, hopeful, vulnerable, willing to believe I might be worth something. And when those people at the auction started their whispers and games, I panicked. I reverted to every defense mechanism I'd ever built. By attacking me. By attacking the person who mattered most, yes. Because I was terrified you'd start to see me the way they did. That you'd realize you'd made a mistake." Amara set the photograph down carefully. "Do you remember what you said to Marcus in the hospital? When you touched his hand?" "I said I was glad he was okay." "Before that, you said, 'I'm glad you're okay, Marcus.' Not 'I'm glad the boy is okay,' or 'I'm glad he's okay.' You used his name. You saw him as a person, not just a victim you'd rescued." Edward nodded, not understanding where she was going. "That night at the auction, you stopped seeing me as Amara, the woman who chose to be there with you. You saw me as the beautiful nurse who must have ulterior motives, because that's what they wanted you to see. You let their poison become your truth." The words hit him like physical blows. "You're right. I know I'm right. The question is, which version of yourself do you want to be? The man who sees people as they really are, or the man who sees them through the lens of his own fear?" Edward was quiet for a long time, staring at the photograph of his younger self. "I want to be the man you thought I was when you looked at me in that hospital room," he said finally. "The man who would do anything to protect someone he loved. But Amara, I don't know if I know how to be that person consistently. I've spent so many years being defensive, being angry." "Then learn," she said simply. "We both have to learn. I have to learn to trust that not everyone will leave when things get difficult. You have to learn to trust that someone can love you exactly as you are. Can you forgive me?" Amara reached across the table and took the photograph, studying the hopeful face of the boy Eddie had once been. "I can forgive you. But I need you to promise me something. Anything." Promise me that when the world tries to tell you who you are, you'll remember who you really are instead. Promise me you'll remember the man who saved Marcus, who set up that college fund, who was gentle enough to touch a sick child's hand like he was made of glass. I promise. His voice was thick with emotion. And promise me that when you're scared of losing me, you'll talk to me instead of pushing me away. I promise that too. Amara smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since before the auction. Then we can try again. Slowly. Carefully. But we can try. Edward felt tears streaming down his cheeks, not caring who might see. I love you, Amara. I know it's too soon to say it, but I need you to know. I love you too, Eddie. She reached across the table and touched his face, just as she had in his office that day. I love the man who jumps into freezing water to save strangers. I love the man who donates college funds anonymously. I love the man who's brave enough to let someone see his heart. Even after everything I said? Especially after everything you said. Because now I know you'll fight for us, even if you fight dirty sometimes. Edward laughed through his tears, a sound of pure relief and joy. So where do we go from here? He asked. We start over. Hi, I'm Amara Washington, and I'm a pediatric nurse who believes in second chances. Edward wiped his eyes and extended his hand across the table. Hi, I'm Eddie Blackstone, and I'm a man learning how to be worthy of the love someone amazing is offering him. They shook hands formally, then dissolved into laughter at the absurdity of it. Can I ask you something? Edward said. Always. Will you come to dinner at my place next week? I've been watching cooking shows for years, and I'd like to try making something for you. Only if you promise not to order takeout as backup. I promise to trust that you'll love me even if I burn dinner. Deal. As they sat in Rosie's Corner Cafe, hands linked across the table, both of them felt the settling sensation of two people who'd found their way home to each other. Outside, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, painting the world in golden light. Eddie. Amara said softly. Yes. That little boy in the photograph? He's still in there, isn't he? The one who wanted to play piano, who hoped his father would be proud. Edward touched the photograph gently. I think so. I think you helped me find him again. Good. Because that's the boy I fell in love with. The one who still believes in possibilities. 6 months later, at the next charity auction, Edward and Amara sat at the same table where he'd once sat alone. But this time, the whispers around them were different. Look how happy he seems. She's good for him. Did you hear about the scholarship program they're starting together? When Marcus Thompson, now 9 years old and fully recovered, took the stage to thank the hospital for saving his life, he looked directly at their table and waved. Edward waved back, no longer caring who saw him, no longer afraid of taking up space in the world. As the little boy spoke about wanting to become a doctor so he could save people too, Edward squeezed Amara's hand. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For seeing my heart when I'd forgotten I had one. Amara smiled and squeezed back. Thank you for letting me. In the end, it turned out that love wasn't about being perfect for each other. It was about being real with each other, broken pieces and all, and choosing to build something beautiful together. And in Rosie's Corner Cafe, their regular table by the window was always waiting for them, every Sunday morning, where a man named Eddie and a woman named Amara continued writing their love story one honest conversation at a time. Some fairy tales, they learned, were worth the wait. Thank you for watching to the end. I believe you enjoyed it. We have a lot of other interesting stories like this lined up for you already, so click the image showing on your screen to watch the next.